So what's being done right now? Well, there are some national geoengineering programs. The United Kingdom has one. China has one. The Gates Foundation is funding some research, a small team in the U.S. And there are people actually planning field experiments next year. There are modeling efforts, which are pretty benign. They're fairly small scale. And very recently, the National Science Foundation in the U.S. funded a group, a team of research scientists led by Penn State, to look at climate responses across the board. Not just geoengineering, but they included geoengineering in the mix. As far as I know, the first such U.S.-funded research activity. So that's fairly new. And don't take my word for it. Listen to the World Economic Forum. Every year they put out a risk assessment. Just a couple of weeks ago they put out a risk assessment and they listed 5 wildcards or X factors for the 21st century. Rogue geoengineering was one of those. This is The Economist and the business leaders worrying about somebody taking rogue action and just messing it up for everybody.
It's very important we communicate what we're doing to the public. We're very interested in making sure everyone knows what we're doing. We're not, we're a civilian space agency dedicated to science and research and so on. So we're very, very keen to make sure that the taxpayers know what we're doing and everything. So,
well, you know, when the article came out in the major newspapers, including the Huffington Post, there was no mention of lithium, not one. Not one mention of lithium. Until I heard the recording of the actual, I listened to it. I listened to the rockets go off. I had no idea there was going to be a lithium dispersed until I heard payload lithium dispersed.
Right, there was lithium dispersed, and I'd be happy to talk to you about it. I think you might be under some misconceptions about what we're doing, but I'm happy to tell you any details that you need.
Well, I know that it says in your article that you're doing it for communications.
Okay, I'm happy to talk to you more about it. There are many reasons we're doing it.
Okay.
We don't understand how the wind in the upper atmosphere moves.
Mm-hmm.
In these chemtrails, there's different kinds of chemtrails, as you probably know. Different trails at night we use and different trails during the day. The wind blows them around. They glow either on their own or from scattered sunlight. We take pictures and we can see how the wind trail moves around and use that to infer what the wind is. Just like if you were taking a picture of an airplane contrail, you can use that to see how the wind was blowing up at those altitudes. This is much higher altitude, so we use these chemical trails.
And what is the purpose of knowing what the wind's going to do in the ionosphere?
The purpose is the ionosphere is really to understand our planet. It's very fundamental science. We're trying to understand every day. We know there's electric currents that flow over the head. They're just naturally there. They've been there for, you know, ever since the Earth had an atmosphere and a magnetic field. And the wind is driven by the sun. The sun heats the atmosphere. The wind blows. And every day that wind drives an electric current. And we're trying to understand what causes that. Essentially, how does it work in detail? And also importantly, when the sun becomes active with lots of sunspots and lots of magnetic activity, that changes the wind pattern and changes the electric current. So we want to understand both what it is on a regular day when there's no solar activity, and then what it is when there's a lot of solar activity.
Is there some other kind of a way that you can use it without dispersing the lithium?
We're researching other ways. The lithium is actually harmless to the environment, and we could show you more about that. But it is tricky to use because we have to. It's very faint. You can't see it with your naked eye. You have to, have special cameras to see it and so on. So we don't like to use it for that reason. It's hard. In other words, it's hard measurement to make. We're researching other ways to put sensors directly on the rocket to measure the wind, and those are ongoing. We're trying to develop those now. In fact, one of the purposes of this mission was to do that.
Okay. Well, you've explained it to me then. I don't agree with it, but I appreciate you explaining it to me.
Email too if you have detailed questions, anything you want.
Okay, I will. I'm gonna research a little more, and I will email you. And I appreciate you taking the time out to speak to me today, sir.
Your call. It's not often we get to hear from members of the public and people who are really interested and concerned with what we're doing. I really appreciate your time.
I wish more people would call. I really do. I've called my senators. I've called my governor. You can't get through to anyone, sir. You can't get through to anybody.
Yeah.
I go to my city council. I live in rural North Carolina. They don't care. They laugh you out of there. There's no other recourse for us, sir, unless to talk to people directly and find out what is going on, because we're paying for it.
Well, I don't know how far you are from Wallace Flight Facility. Is that easy? Is that drivable from where you are?
Where is it, sir? I don't know where it is.
It's north of Norfolk, Virginia. It's on the eastern shore of Virginia. If you're at Norfolk, it would probably take you another 2.5 hours to get there.
Uh-huh.
So if you're in North Carolina, I don't know where you are, but maybe
Right. Yeah, I'm in western rural North Carolina near the Tennessee border.
Have a chance, you might consider either going to Goddard Space Flight Facility, which is outside of D.C. There is Clemson University, which is where all the chemical release work is done.
Oh, really? Well, that's very close to me.
You might contact those guys. I'm sure they'd be happy to explain what they're doing.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay, I will do that. Just like ask for the science department.
Well, I don't know what department they're in, but Larson, Larsen, Miguel Larson is the lead, and he's been doing this for decades and can explain in detail what they're doing and why it's not an issue for people living. We wouldn't, we would be, as a government agency, we would not be allowed, to do anything that would be harmful. So he's under strict controls and that sort of thing. So he can explain it to you. He can even show you around, that sort of thing.
Okay, and you said his name was Miguel Larson with an L?
Larsen.
Okay, at Clemson. Okay, well, thank you so much, Mr. Rowland. I appreciate all of your information.
Yes.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
These are conditions you have to have. These have to be present in order to form a persistent control. So, and that's actually hardly ever the case. You need to have certain conditions. One of which you have to be an airplane above 30,000 feet. The temperature has to be below 40 degrees centigrade, and you have to have a relative humidity of 67%. You cannot see a control which is from the whole spectrum of the horizon. You see controls just persistent there of different altitudes. That's physically is impossible. So in that sense, that's science. It's physics. So there must be another reason for it that it's there. They officially admitted that they're doing it. I mean, geoengineering programs, they are on for decades. They did it in the Vietnam War. It's there. And they also admitting it that they're doing this now, right now, as we speak. I mean, the official narrative is that they do this in order to stop global warming. So the geoengineering programs are there to protect us against global warming. That's the official narrative, and that's why they spray the atmosphere full with all these heavy metals and all to reflect sunlight, solar radiation management. That's the purpose. That's why they spray. For instance, in 2009, they already stated that they want to spray 20 million tons of aluminium nanoparticles.
That's right.
In the atmosphere. That's officially, so it's not like a conspiracy or whatever. It's a very, very multi-layered operation and programs. It's very difficult to see exactly what is going on. There are numerous ways of doing it in the spraying or in solar radiation management or in the ionosphere heaters. It's a multi-layered programming. So there's not one method how they do it. They're spraying with different chemicals, visibly or non-visible. So it's not one method. It's commercial and it's military. So you have military spraying aircraft, tanker aircraft who do spraying, but you also have commercial aircraft who are doing it. I think certain airliners are involved in it. They are aware and they are paid for it to be involved in it. And then you have the commercial airlines. A lot of commercial airlines, they are not aware of it because it's also part of the fuel policies. So it's done as additives in the fuel. That's the thing. Another thing is that in the commercial aviation, the policy of fuel it's more and more merged into a single fuel policy. So there are not really a lot of different producers of kerosene or fuel. There's maybe only one producer of the fuel, so it's easier to add it in the fuel. But and they make use of very bad quality fuel as well. They change to bad quality fuel. So that's also an element of the fact that you see more of this going on.
Connection has been the aluminum in the vaccines. I wrote several articles about the effect of the adjuvants in vaccines, including the mercury and the aluminum effect. Then I found some articles about the chemtrails, and there was a lot being said about it, and I wasn't too sure whether it was true or not, because in my state we rarely saw them. But as I started looking on the internet, and I would see these states in which there were these crisscross patterns, and they were very tight patterns, and these geometrical shapes, where it was obvious it was a purposeful covering of the atmosphere with these patterns. And the trails were so long. Well, now, we're starting to see them in my state. And as I look at them, they go from horizon to horizon. Well, I've been alive long enough to know that jets never did that in the past. And I see the same patterning effect now where they're crisscrossing. It's an obvious pattern. And so I looked into the literature and some of the reports and YouTube videos, and they were saying that they were dropping one of the ingredients was aluminum. Well, I had done a fair amount of writing and research on the effect of aerosolized chemicals in the nose when you breathe them. And what we knew was that these particles tend to travel along the olfactory nerves, which are the smell nerves in the nose, and it travels directly to the part of the brain that has to do with memory and emotions, the hippocampus, the entorhinal area, and the prefrontal cortex, and that you can trace these chemicals traveling along that nerve and depositing in this area of the brain. The other thing that was known is that if you aerosolize aluminum, it's one of the metals that passes very easily along this track and directly into the brain, so it bypasses the blood-brain barrier and goes directly into the brain and accumulates. Well, if you do it in animals, it produces lesions or damage in that area of the brain, and the animal will begin to show changes of memory and learning and emotional changes. When we look at people who have Alzheimer's disease, ironically, the highest concentration of aluminum in the brain is that same entry point, what's called the entorhinal cortex, and the levels continue to accumulate. So we have compelling evidence that aerosolized aluminum alone will enter the brain and produce damage to that critical area of the brain. The worst of all is the nanosize. Now, nanosize means you make it such a small particle that it easily penetrates skin, it penetrates barriers in the body that normally metals cannot pass through. When you nanosize and produce these incredibly small particulate matter, it passes very easily. So when you nanosize aluminum and you use it in these aerosols through the nasal passages, it enters the brain in very high concentrations. And they find that the nanosized aluminum in the brain is infinitely more toxic. Now, one of the toxic reactions to aluminum is intense inflammation and activation of cells in the brain that are the immune cells called microglia. Aluminum is a very potent activator of these immune cells, and that triggers the release of a powerful substance called glutamate, which is an excitotoxin that causes cells to die from an excitatory mechanism, kind of complex mechanism, but it is a combination of inflammation and excitotoxicity. And I coined the term in the medical literature called immunoexcitotoxicity to describe that process. So we know that occurs. We know it occurs very easily. Now, the reports are coming out now that what they're spraying is nano-size aluminum, and the idea is the whole concept of preventing global warming. And they nano-size the aluminum so it'll stay in the upper atmosphere longer, supposedly as a reflective compound, metal. The problem with that, even from a climatologic description, is that if you make it into cirrus-like clouds rather than reflecting it upward and out of the atmosphere, it reflects the heat downward and actually causes global warming. So you could envision that they're doing this on purpose to make the atmosphere heat up so they can see the atmosphere is warming up. But what I'm concerned about mainly is the medical effect, and that's because of this very strong connection between aluminum passing through this pathway into the brain is so strongly connected with Alzheimer's disease and other diseases pieces of memory. If you're aerosolizing this and spraying literally tons of it over the world, and people are constantly breathing that aerosolized nano-sized aluminum, which will easily penetrate filters in your air-conditioned system, enter your home. So you're breathing it 24 hours a day, producing high levels of aluminum in this part of the brain, and the consequences could be absolutely devastating. Could cause a huge increase in Alzheimer's disease and inflammatory neurological disorders. Now, I watched YouTube, which was a Geo-Engineering conference that the government had put on. And in the conference, one of the questions somebody in the audience asked, well, what is the medical effect of spraying aluminum in the atmosphere? And the speaker said, well, we don't really know, but we're in the process of researching that. Well, of course, that was an absolute lie. We do know what it does.
Right.
But the fact that they were admitting that, in fact, they were going to spray, they gave it in the future tense, that they were going to spray aluminum. The evidence now from the examination by biologists and scientists around the world is that the aluminum level in the lakes and streams and trees is increasing enormously. Some areas have incredible elevations of aluminum in the groundwater and in the vegetation. So if this indeed is happening, we're looking at a medical catastrophe that's worldwide.
For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no rumor is printed, no secret is revealed.